listening to those lists of names was very hard for me. I'm sure it was for you too. I went through a number of emotions. Extreme grief at the horrific loss of all of these lives from our community. Fear for the trans people here in this room and abroad. And pain, as I imagine what the friends and lovers of those folks are going through in their loss. And I finally settled on one emotion, a good, long, deep, hard anger. Some of you may have had the chance to review the list of names of those who were murdered. Anyone? Did anybody see the list of names of those who were murdered? Just a handful? I'm going to give you some highlights. As in previous years, the people on this list were brutally murdered. These are a few more details to paint a more accurate picture of the final moments of these people's lives. This won't be pleasant for you to hear, and it's not pleasant for me to say, but it's the reason we're here, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yasmin, from Honduras. Death date, November 20th. Happy Trans Remembrance Day. Attacked, beaten, and killed. Tasia Elsie and Michael Green, Indiana, USA. December 26, 2008. Tasia and Michael were shot to death. It's believed they were shot because they were in a relationship. Tasia was trans. Tasia was 34, Michael was 22. Diana Garcia, Peru. January 22nd, 2009. She was found dead in her own hairdressing salon, and she'd been stabbed 20 times. She was 31. Ida Yildirim, Turkey. March 22nd, 2009. This one's so hard. Ida was decapitated, and her sexual organs were tossed in a dumpster. Ramona Martinez, Dominican Republic, April 23rd. Ramona was brutally burned, severely stabbed, and left disposed of, wrapped in a plastic sheet. I'll give you just one more. Name unknown, Brazil, June 22nd, 2009. This woman was a sex worker who was shot to death by a client. She was 16. In 2001, there were 19 trans people, or people who were perceived to be trans or who were partners of trans people, around the world who were reported murdered in that year. That was in 2001. In 2005, that number had risen to 29. And this year, 100. 100 names. That's a 500% increase. Now, we don't know if that is because that's an actual increase in violence, or if it actually just represents more reporting in the global social network. In either case, it's disgusting. Out of those 100 names, I noticed how rarely gunfire had been involved. Only 25 out of those 100 were shootings. Most of the deaths were intimate violence, people who were within arm's length of each other, touching. 2 people, perhaps, or more, in the case of the group beatings. Most of the people were stabbed, but the occasional strangulation, immolation, and beating was thrown in. As Ricky Ann Wilkins said, trans activist, trans people are never killed from 50 feet away with a high-powered rifle. No, we're killed up close and personal because people want to see us die. The murdered range in age from 16 to 64. Where age was reported, only 6 were over the age of 40. Of the total number of names, 41 are actually unnamed. Anonymous. All we know of these souls is the month in which they died. Their anonymity suggests that they had no social connections in the community, no family ties. In all likelihood, many of them were sex workers. It's likely that those women also, therefore, never had a memorial service, a funeral, flowers, people crying in their honor, except for us. Tonight, we are their funeral. They are the forgotten ones, and they make our job here tonight that much more poignant. Many countries across the globe are represented in that death toll, including countries with all levels of wealth, all levels of development, and all levels of human rights protections. Although this year, not Canada, sometimes in the past, of course. It would be so easy for me to point to another country and say, them and their violent ways, it would never happen here. But violence against trans people happens everywhere, and systemic oppression is universal. So instead of looking outward, perhaps we should look inward. Here's where we get a little political. In Canada, people can apply for refugee status when they have a reasonable fear of persecution because of race, religion, or membership in a particular social group. And yes, being trans would count under that category. But here's the problem. Many countries that appear on this death toll hold legal and social protections for trans people. In some countries, a trans person has held public office. In some of those countries, their public health system provides sex reassignment surgeries. In some countries, and in one federal government had even released its National Plan of Promotion of Citizenship and Human Rights for LGBTs. Among the policies suggested in that plan are providing rights for trans people to change their legal name and their sex designation without having to file a lawsuit. So the sum total of this, by the standards of the Canadian Immigration and Refugee Board, trans asylum applications from those countries would be summarily dismissed because it would not be considered reasonable for them to have fear of persecution. Refugee claims are rejected when a claimant qualifies for protection in their home state. This is more true now than ever. Citizenship and Immigration Minister Jason Kenney has promised to refocus Canada's refugee system on what the government calls the real victims, rather than migrants seeking to abuse the process. And for the first time, Canada could actually fast-track rejections of refugees from safe countries.
Shame.
Shame.
Shame indeed.
Apparently, those countries could not possibly, people from those countries could not possibly have a legitimate claim as a refugee. They could not possibly be in peril for their lives. And many of us in this room have witnessed this phenomenon for ourselves. A couple of years ago, it was a trans woman, Cher, who had to fight to try to stay in Canada. We worked with some of her lawyers to try to develop evidence that would prove that she was at great risk if she returned to her home country. But in the courtroom, the other side simply read a list of those protections that that country guarantees their citizens. Cher was deported.
As if the government gives a darn.
The government's position was simply to read aloud a list of protections and benefits that had been legislated for trans people in that country, and poof, magically, all danger disappeared. Because we all know that as soon as a government releases a position statement on human rights, everyone immediately throws aside decades of fear and hatred and sits down for afternoon tea. In 2008, Canada received 34,800 applications for refugee status. They granted asylum to only 7,550 and have already departed roughly 12,000 back to their country of origin. And I do wonder how many of those people were trans, and how many of them are still alive. And I find myself wondering, how is Cher? Tonight we've come together to honor our dead, but it needn't be a passive spectator sport. It's good that we've had the minute of silence, but we can do more than that. We can call for change to the systems that oppress our sisters and brothers, and we can hold our government accountable for the deaths that they may have contributed to or will contribute to in the future. Let me be clear, I have no knowledge of any of these women or men ever tried to seek a refugee claim in Canada, and I'm not claiming that they did. But I do know that if they had tried, they would have failed.